Hello, welcome back. Today I'm going to show you how you can make your own sea glass and shell lampshade. As usual, I will have some of the items that I have used in my description page, and I am an Amazon affiliate, so I will get a little percentage if you end up purchasing anything after looking at it. Anyways, here are the pictures of the sea glass bag that I got from Hobby Lobby. This is after I tumbled them some more. So that original sea glass was like tumbled, but it wasn't really smooth on the edges. So I tumbled it in my rock tumbler for a few days to get it even smoother. Here I am showing how I foiled each little piece of glass. Now I'm using 7 32" black backed foil that I cut in half so it's not very wide. And then I'm wrapping around every little piece of sea glass. And there's a whole bunch of them. And I do a whole bunch before I start working so I can choose what I need. I have a video on how to make this. This is a styrofoam ball that I covered with clear silicone after I drew some concentric circles on it. Now I am using some push pins and my gel flux and my solder, and I'm starting to solder the little pieces of sea glass onto my shade that I'm making. So I'm using the push pins and regular straight pins to help hold the sea glass in place as I'm going. You don't have to pin every single one in place, but it does help. Now you may wonder why my hands look so odd. I have silicone gloves on my hands. Now, the good thing about using silicone in your projects is that silicone is kind of a heat resistant, gives you like a heat resistant film between your skin and the hot solder. Now, it's not perfect, so it'll just kind of dull the burn, but it does give you a little bit more time to react if you happen to get some solder on you. And I found it very, very useful. I like these particular gloves, and I will put them in the description page because they cling really close to your skin, so you don't even feel like you have any gloves on. Because I don't really like using your typical heat-resistant gloves because they're kind of cumbersome, and I can't actually feel what I'm doing. Now, the problem with these gloves is they're kind of thin. They're not made at all for what I'm using them for. And they will not last that long. You'll get holes in them if you have long nails like I do or catch them on things. But it does seem to help. I think it's better than just having your bare hand there. Now, the reason I like to have lots of different pieces of glass already foiled is that you really want to pick and choose what pieces you want to use to fit in different places, because some fit very nicely and some don't. And if you add flux every time you solder, it just makes it a little bit easier. If you have a little flux on the adjacent piece of glass, then the solder will generally stick enough to make the tack, but you might want to add flux after that to kind of fill in the little gaps. Now you might wonder what those weird wires are, that they're an array of like 8 wires, thin wires I have attached to the top that are sticking out there at the bottom. There's one, there's another one on the left. Those are thin wires that I attach to the middle part of my lamp, and I'm just kind of bending them off and on around the different, I'm using an old piece of solder. I like to use any scrap I have, so I'm going to be using fresh solder at times, and I'll be using scraps at times. So anyways, those wires, I'm bending around the glass, sea glass, as I go to help strengthen it. I just feel more comfortable having a wire going through my projects from the middle all the way to the bottom to help ensure that the pressure of all that heavy glass is not just on the foil and the solder. And remember, I'm only using half the width of a normal piece of foil. And because of that, the foil is not like wrapped around the glass as much as just stuck to the outside and kind of like holding it in place. But it's not as secure as when you wrap a foil all the way around your glass, like typical stained glass work. Typical stained glass, you actually wrap it around the edges. So once you solder it, you're making kind of a little soldered frame that holds everything together. Well, this isn't going to have that extra support, because if I did that, I would have hardly any glass shown when I'm done, because as you see, these are very small pieces of sea glass. And of course, you could use larger pieces of sea glass, but remember, the larger the glass you use on a round object like this, the more the glasses just kind of stick out in areas, because it's not going to go around the curve as much. So the smaller pieces will bend around your sphere better than if you had large chunks of glass. Now, as you notice, I am filling in little cracks with solder. Now, when you're doing this, when you're filling in little gaps, you want to use, you want to let your original solder tack cool down a little bit, because if you try to add solder into one of these little holes with the original already hot, still hot, what's going to happen is you're going to be heating up your original solder joint, and it's basically going to just pop out. It's not going to stay there. So in order for the little fill-in areas to actually fill in like you want them to, you're going to want to wait until, see, I'm just plopping a piece of glass right there to help fill in that area. You're going to want to wait till it's cooled down a little bit before you add the solder. So you can use tweezers like I'm doing right now to hold an old hunk of solder, or you can use brand new solder, whatever is handy and whatever works for you. At times, I just hold the piece of glass with my finger, and at times, because remember, I do have that little bit of barrier with those gloves, that does help it so that I'm not going to burn myself. So sometimes I am just holding it with my gloved fingers, and sometimes I am actually using thumbtacks or straight pins to hold it in place. So when I'm trying to fill up these gaps, there I'm bending the wire a little bit. So I'm heating it up again and then just bending it. So to fill these gaps, if you heat up the solder like above it and just kind of like let it drool down into the hole that you're trying to fill, that seems to work very nicely. If you try to put a lot of hot solder just where you want it to be, you may find that it just kind of melts out and falls to the to your work table. So it's kind of like going back and forth to different areas. And when I was done with this whole project, I spent, probably an hour or two filling gaps that I still had, because you have a lot of gaps with this kind of stained glass work. It's impossible to have all these pieces of glass, finding the exact right piece of glass to fill all the teeny weeny gaps. So see, I'm just tacking it in place, and then later on I will come back and see I'm like heating up above it kind of to make it drool into that spot. And then later on I did try to smooth over some of the larger globs of solder so they weren't quite so noticeable. But yeah, this isn't a really smooth soldering technique that you end up with, perfect smooth lines like you might have on some stained glass work. Ooh, that one fits very nicely. So yeah, I'm using some of the gel flux. I'm putting some flux on it, and yeah, see, you can tell that those gloves don't stay on your fingers all that well, but they really do help. So I'm tacking in a few places, and then I'm adding some solder into that gap. Now, if you, when you're filling the gap, if you do it too quickly or expect it to fill up too much a gap, you may find that you are actually heating all the foil all the way around it, and the whole piece might fall out. This is the top piece, and I bought 100% brass, uncoated brass top, and I just coated that all with solder so that when I'm done I can patina it and it'll all kind of blend together. Now this you will take you a few hours to do this part, which is just going in the back of it, turning it over, and filling any area that is not filled or has extra globs. You want to make sure that it's as soldered as possible. So anything that's still copper colored, isn't soldered as much as it could be. Now, I do have a video on this. This is a silicone hollow ball that I made over a balloon, and I'm going to be using this next for continuing my my sphere. I didn't want to, and I filled it with some starch so that it wouldn't stick to itself later on. Now, what I'm using this for is as another type of mold to put my my lampshade on while I'm making it. So I used a piece of 2x4 and just using angle brackets, I screwed it onto a piece of wood. I put a bunch of batting around this 2x4 and then shoved the ball on and then stuck more batting inside to fill the ball. Now, the good thing about this is I'll be able to remove it easily. I bought a whole bunch of shells, and I will detail about where I got them, the whole bunch of different shaped shells, because I wanted to put shells at the bottom of this sea glass lamp. And first of all, I had to put foil around them. Here again, I only used the half of the normal 7/32 inch width of foil. Now, the thing with putting foil on different objects like I'm doing right here is you never know, how great they're going to stick to the object. But it's a fun experiment, and it ended up working quite nicely. So I'm burnishing or pressing down all the foil so it's sticking as much as possible. I ended up having to wrap wire around some of these also to help keep them on the lamp, because you see it did wrap around a little bit underneath, which was good. It really helped keep those particular shaped shells stuck to my lamp. I also wanted to use some starfish, and I wanted to use them seeing one side of them or seeing the other side. So if I wanted to see this top side, I put the foil kind of underneath them. So I didn't want to, put the foil wrapped so that the foil ended up taking up the whole top of the starfish. So I wrapped around the bottom, kind of underneath, knowing that I would solder there, and that ended up working quite nicely. But yeah, it's always you know, kind of a crapshoot if you're actually gonna if it's actually gonna stick. And this actually worked quite nicely. I didn't have to wire on very many of these. They pretty much stuck nicely. And when you're soldering things on, if you kind of have extra solder around the top here and there, that does help hold it together. Now this is kind of an odd shape. I knew that there was no way I was going to find little pieces of glass that's going to fit around all those little spikes. So I decided I'm going to either go on one side or the other side of the spikes. That way I won't have to worry about like wanting glass to fill between each individual spike. And some of these shells, as I said, I did wrap wire on, and I will show you some of that in a few minutes. But anyway, so I did a whole bunch of these shells. I think I did like 3 or 4 of each type that I had. So I had a nice variety. I didn't end up using all of them, but I wanted to have, you know, a choice for when I'm working on the soldering part of this project. And again, you want to press them down as thoroughly as you can, because that's really the only thing that's attaching the solder to the shell will be the stickiness in between and the fact that you put solder all around it. I ended up putting one of these shells where I thought I wanted them. I drew some concentric lines on my balloon mold so that I knew how far down I would make my shade before, so it would be kind of symmetrical. Now the reason why I wanted to use a balloon mold instead of just that styrofoam one was I was concerned that if I got far enough down in my sphere that I went past the diameter, then I wouldn't be able to remove my styrofoam mold. But with a balloon type mold, if it doesn't want to just release going straight up, I will be able to take the stuffing out of the balloon mold, and then the mold would collapse, and like those balls that I did earlier, those Christmas balls, I would be able to then remove the mold, and I wouldn't hurt the mold, and my project would be safe and secure also. So I put that shell where I wanted the bottom of the lamp to be, and now I'm just adding some sea glass between the existing lampshade that I've already made and the shell itself. So I'm just adding kind of that gap in between. So this gave me kind of an indication of how much farther down around the shell that I needed to go. And remember, I have absolutely tons of pieces of glass. I have a small tumbler, and I tumbled 3 or 4 batches of this sea glass, so I have a lot of pieces. I even have enough left over to make another small sea glass lamp, which I'll probably do. Because I really love the sea glass, because with the sea glass, you don't have to worry about the light bulb of your lamp shining like brightly through your lamp, and you don't have to like tint the inside of your lamp with any kind of diffusion, because a sea glass is already diffused. So it's never going to be that glaring light that you sometimes get with light going directly through stained glass. So it's really pretty. So as you can see, some of the pieces of sea glass was very, very small, like that long skinny piece. You want to have a bunch of variety, because there's a lot of gaps. And if you can fill the gaps with glass, it just looks a lot better than filling glass gaps with solder. Plus, the solder, obviously is more cumbersome, more expensive, and not as attractive as a piece of of glass. And see, there is a hole there. Oh well, I'll have to fill that one up. Oops. And here again, if you heat it up too much, it's going to fall off. And sometimes it falls on the floor and you don't find that piece again, so you find a different piece. Oh well. That is a silicone washer that I use often, attached to a straight pin. And sometimes I use those washers to put underneath things to hold them in place. I like to use bigger pieces of sea glass when I can, and thus use only the really little ones to fill the gaps. And here again, I am continually moving those wires, kind of lacing them in between the different pieces of sea glass. I don't really want to see those wires at all. So those wires are just there for strength, and I'm just kind of soldering and hiding them in between the different pieces of glass. So you saw a minute ago, I heated up above the piece of glass and then had it kind of melt into where I'm going. So yeah, nothing is set in stone. I kind of am going as I'm soldering as I'm going. And as you notice, the piece of foil did start coming off the shell right there, but I kind of used the solder to help hold it together. And this wire, I am going to use that to help hold the shell. When I was done, I put wire around everything at the bottom. I do have a video on how to support the finished edge, and this is one of the ways I use often is I add a thin wire around the bottom of the project to help hold everything together. Also, of course, having another piece of glass right there that it's soldered to, and that the glass is soldered to the basic strength of the whole project will help hold it together also. I'm adding another piece of solder right there, and it's going, you can't really see it that well, but it's going underneath the shell where I put the foil. So I'm soldering the wire to the foil of the shell itself. And here I'm trying to solder around the edge of the shell, but then I realized that the shell is just not, it's just not strong enough, that foil is not holding it well enough. So I decide I'm going to wrap a wire around the actual shell itself, and that will help secure it in place. And because I ended up using a copper patina, it kind of went nicely with the shell color, so it all blended together. But I decided that the top really wasn't, that pointy part of the shell wasn't very secure either, so I decided I was going to add a wire up there also. So since I didn't have a wire already loose, I just soldered a piece of wire to the solder that was already there, so to one of the solder joints. So I soldered some solder there, some wire, and then after it started to, after it was cool enough, I bent the wire and soldered it to the other end. Yeah, it ended up being a little wiggly, but you know, that's okay. Shells aren't perfectly smooth anyway, so a little wiggle in the solder is not the end of the world. So this way I had it nicely attached. Now my shell will not go anywhere and I will be able to continue on my way. So any shell that was acting a little bit loose, I then wrapped a wire around it. You don't want them to fall off later on. Now there were times when the seashells themselves came loose when I was working, and I would either refoil the same after I cleaned some of the gunk off, because the foil does kind of leave a gunky residue if you take them off. So I would either use a different piece of seashell, or I would clean the one that I had and refoil it and use it. So right now I'm working on soldering the inside. I took it off the form, and I'm adding solder to any joint that there is that's not completely soldered. And I'm also trying to find any gap. And if there's any gap, I'm filling it with solder. If the gap seems really large, I will add another seashell. Piece of glass, sea glass, to the back to fill the gap. So as you can see, it does use a bunch of solder to do a project like this. And right now I'm using brand new solder, but at times I do also use scraps that I have. And you can see all the different seashells that I added. And right there, there's some copper showing. So obviously it's not soldered completely, so I know that I need to add solder to those areas. So if there's big globs, or if there's copper showing, or if there's gaps, those are the areas that I'm really concentrating on. I'm also making sure that around the outside rim, see, I just added a small shell, a small piece of sea glass right there, and I'm using that to fill in a gap. So this is my project now. It's all done. I put some plastic on my balloon mold. I'm using copper patina and a squirt gun, and I am spraying the inside and the outside with copper patina. Now, you don't have to use a spray gun. You can just use a toothbrush or a paintbrush or a cotton swab. But if there's a real lot of surfaces to do, like there is on this particular project, and it's coming from all different angles, it's just easier to spray it and then use a toothbrush or any other kind of brush and kind of move the patina around to get all the different areas. And this ended up to be a copper. It wasn't a bright copper because I didn't scrub the solder joints with like steel wool and get them wicked clean. It's kind of an antique-y copper looking, and I really like it. I think it goes very nice with the seashells, and it was a very nice lamp when I was done. I was very pleased with the project, and it was great. And thank you for watching, and have fun with your project. I think it's just fun to come up with different things one can do with stained glass. Thanks. Bye.